the transport of the plasma membrane. Transport across plasma membrane. So, what is the plasma membrane which helps in the transport across? So, always the plasma membrane, it is a gatekeeper, it acts as a gatekeeper. That means, let us say it is a cell, it is a gatekeeper. That means it permits the molecule by seeing what is the composition of this molecule. This is called the gatekeeper. That means it selectively allows some molecule. So that's why the plasma membrane is also called as the selectively permeable membrane. Permeable membrane, or it is also called as the plasma membrane is also called as the semi-permeable membrane. Semi-permeable membrane. That means this membrane or the plasma membrane structure, it doesn't allow to all the molecules. It selectively allows some molecule. That's why it is called as the selectively permeable membrane or the semi-permeable membrane. So, what are the different types of the transport across the plasma membrane? There are the two types of the transport are present. One is called as the passive transport. Another is the active transport. So, what is the passive transport? The passive transport means that any molecule which can transport without use of the energy. Or the active transport, it transports to the cell or the outside the cell by using the energy. Now come to the passive transport. The passive transport means the molecule transports along the concentration gradient. What is the along concentration gradient? That means from the higher concentration to lower concentration. Look at this structure. Let us say this is the outer layer, this is the inner layer. What is the outer layer? That means let us say this is the cell. It is the inner, it is the outer. Let us say this structure, if it is zoom, it looks like this. That means it is the outer layer, it is the inner layer. Look at this molecule. This molecule is present higher concentration at the outer side and the lower concentration in the lower side. That means here the two molecules are present in the inside, and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, more than 2 molecules are present at the outer side. So that's why this molecule can directly pass from the higher concentration to the lower concentration, and this is called as the along the concentration gradient. Okay. So the passive transport, it is two types of the passive transport. One is called as the simple diffusion. Another is the facilitated diffusion. What is the simple diffusion? The simple diffusion means the gas, for example, the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. they can pass easily through the plasma membrane along the concentration gradient. Let us say this is the cell. In the inside, let us say the carbon dioxide is more. Suppose at the outside the carbon dioxide is low concentration. That means, let us suppose the 5 molecules of the carbohydrate is present at the inside and 3 carbo CO2 molecule they are present at the outside. That means, in the inside more carbohydrate is present, more carbon dioxide is present. That means that now the carbon dioxide transports from the higher concentration to the lower concentration or the along concentration gradient. That means, from the inside to the outside. Let us suppose in the inside the oxygen is present in the lower concentration, at the outside the oxygen is present at the higher concentration at the outside. Now the oxygen comes from the outer to lower. That means, molecule which is present higher concentration and the movement is always from the higher to lower concentration. If it is present at the higher in the inner surface, then it transports from the inner to a higher. If it is present higher in the outer, then it transports from the higher to the outer to the lower, outer to the inner layer. So this is the simple diffusion. One is the gases, another is the non-polar molecule. For example, benzene. Benzene is a non-polar molecule. Why the non-polar molecule they can pass? Because the lipid layer is itself it is a non-polar or the hydrophobic. Always the lipid bilayer, the plasma membrane is hydrophobic. So that's why the hydrophobic molecule they can easily pass the layer, because it can, means this is the hydrophobic molecule, here it is also the hydrophobic molecules. That's why they can mix each other and they can easily pass through the hydrophobic layer. But if it is a hydrophilic molecule, this is the hydrophilic molecule. The hydrophilic molecule they cannot pass through the hydrophobic. Why? Because the hydrophilic cannot interact with the hydrophobic molecule. Because the hydrophilic means those molecules which interact with the water molecule. But the hydrophobic means those molecules which always wants to away from the water molecule. That's why the hydrophilic cannot interact with the hydrophobic molecule. That's why the hydrophobic molecule cannot pass, but the hydrophobic molecule they can pass through the layer. So that's why gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, any gases, and the non-polar molecule, that means the hydrophobic molecule, they can pass also the plasma membrane from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. Another most important thing, one is called as the diffusion. What is the diffusion? Diffusion is the transport of water molecule through the simple diffusion. Sorry, what is the not diffusion? That is the osmosis. Osmosis. What is the osmosis? The osmosis means the transport of the water molecule through the simple diffusion. That is called the osmosis. So that means the osmosis is the sub part of the simple diffusion. That means the simple diffusion, the gases can be passes from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. The non-polar molecule, they can also passes from the higher concentration to the lower concentration, and the water molecule also can passes from the higher concentration to the lower concentration through the simple diffusion, and this process is called as the osmosis. So what is the osmosis? It is the movement of the water through the simple diffusion. through the simple diffusion is called as the osmosis. Okay, so this is the simple diffusion. That means it always moves from the higher to lower concentration or along the concentration gradient. That's why, because it transports from the higher to lower concentration, it does not need any energy. It does not need any energy. So another is the facilitated diffusion. So what is the facilitated diffusion? For example, some molecule, let's say protein. Let's say this molecule, it is the protein. Normally the protein is the hydrophilic molecule. Hydrophilic molecule. Let's say this protein has higher concentration at the outer side. Let's say this is the protein molecule, and it is the hydrophilic. Okay, it is present at the higher concentration at the outer side, and the lower concentration, higher concentration at the outer side, lower concentration at the inner side. But it does not pass through the membrane directly, because this is the hydrophilic molecule. It cannot interact with the hydrophobic core group, because the plasma membrane of the lipid is the hydrophobic group. But if the non-polar molecule, for example the benzene, if it is present at the higher concentration at the outer side, lower at the inner side, it can directly pass through the layer, because the lipid layer is also the hydrophobic, the non-polar of the benzene is also the hydrophobic. So it can interact with each other and they can easily pass through the membrane. But now the protein is the hydrophilic. It does not, or it cannot pass through membrane directly. So that's why it needs some assistant, and this assistant is called as the carrier. That means it needs some carrier for the transport of the molecule from the higher to lower. So this is called as the facilitated diffusion. That means some facilitated needs for the transport of this molecule, and this is called as the carrier, or it is called as the carrier mediated facilitated diffusion. This is called the carrier mediated facilitated diffusion. Okay, so now there are the two types of the transport. One is called as the simple transport, another is the facilitated diffusion, another is the simple diffusion. So what is the simple diffusion? So the gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, non-polar molecule like the benzene along with the water. Water is the exception, that means it transports through the process that is called as the osmosis. So osmosis is simply the simple diffusion in which the molecule is only the water. That means the movement of the water through the simple diffusion is called as the osmosis, and they along with the facilitated diffusion. The facilitated means the hydrophilic molecule or some polar molecule, if it is present higher concentration, then it transports from the higher to lower concentration, but it is facilitated by some carrier, that is called as the carrier mediated facilitated diffusion. Okay, so this is the simple and the facilitated diffusion. So now come to three types of structure. One is called the hypotonic, isotonic, hypertonic. Hypotonic means it is the inside or the inner side, this is the outside. Hypo means low, hyper means high. So, in the solution, one is called as the solute, another is called as the solvent. When the solute means the hypotonic, isotonic, hypertonic solution, they are named according to the solute concentration. That means in the hypotonic solution, at the outer side more solute concentration, so means low solute concentration is present. That means in the inside higher solute concentration is present, at the outer side lower solute concentration is present. In the outer low solute, so if the low solute is present at the outer side, that means more solvent is present. In the inside higher solute is present, that means low solvent is present. Isotonic means in the outer side and the inside all are same. This is called as the ideal condition of the isotonic solution. This is the hypertonic solution. In the hypertonic solution, the outer condition contains more solute at the outer. That means low solvent is present at the outer. Now in the exam it will ask that if any cell, let us say this is the solution and this is called as the hypertonic solution, hypertonic solution. In the exam if it will ask that, let us say this is the one molecule or the one cell, if one cell is transported or is placed to the hypertonic solution, then what will be the condition of that cell? Then the answer will be shrink. Why? Let us say in this area. Now the cell is placed in the cell, inside the cell, this is the hypertonic solution. This solution, this is called as the hypersonic solution. In the hypersonic solution, the solute concentration, the solute is more and the solvent is less, like this. So that means in the inside the solute will be low and the solvent will be high. So that means let us say the solvent is the water. The water molecule is present, this is the solvent means water. So now that means the water molecule is present higher concentration in the inside and the lower concentration is the outer side. So that means it transports from the higher to lower. That means the water released from the lower, higher to lower, that means from the inner to higher. So that means after the transport of the cell, or the placing of the cell to the hypertonic solution, after the transferring the water molecule from the inner to higher, it will shrink like this. Why? Because after transporting the hypertonic solution, the solution of the water concentration is less at the outer side and the water concentration is more in the inside. That means water they transport from the inner to lower, that means from the cell to the outer solution. So that's why it will be shrink. If so, in the exam, if it will be asked that if the cell is placed to the hypertonic solution, it will shrink. So like that, if the cell is transported to the hypotonic solution, let us say this is the cell, this is the hypotonic solution. In the hypotonic solution, the solute concentration is less and the solvent is more. That means in the inside the solvent is less. The solvent means let us say water. Obviously in the cell the solvent is the water. That means in the hypotonic condition the water molecule concentration higher in the outer side and then lower in the inside. So from the higher to lower, that means the water they transports from the higher solution, from the outer solution inside to the inside the cell. That means from this solution it transports to the cell, so that after transferring so many water molecule, the cell will be burst. If the molecule, if the many water molecule, they are transported inside the cell, it will be burst. So if the cell is transported to the hypertonic solution, the cell will be shrink. If it is transported to the hypotonic solution, it will be burst. Okay. So now come to this is the passive transport. Okay, passive means one is the simple diffusion, another is the facilitated diffusion. Simple means the gases and the non-polar and the water molecule, they can pass easily from the higher to lower concentration or along the concentration gradient. Facilitated means the polar molecule transport from the higher to lower concentration. But what if, let us say this is the cell, always inside the cell the sodium concentration is very low and the outer side the sodium concentration is high, and always inside the cell, in the any cell, the potassium concentration is high, and in the outer surface the sodium concentration the sodium concentration is low. Okay. So that means in the simple diffusion or the facilitated diffusion, it always the sodium transports from the higher to lower, that means from the outer to the lower, from the outer to the inside, the sodium transports. But the potassium through the passive transport always transports from the inside to the outer side. Okay. But in sometimes the potassium transports from the outer to lower, or the sodium transports from the lower inside to the outer side. And this type of the transport is called as the active transport. Active transport. So that means here the active transport means transport of the solute or the transport of the molecule against concentration gradient. Against concentration gradient means from the lower concentration to the higher concentration. So because against concentration gradient, it needs some use of the energy. Look at this structure. In this structure, let us say this is the outer, this is the inner layer. In the outer layer, low concentration is present, and the inside higher concentration is present. So if in the passive transport, it can easily pass from the inner to the outer, but it cannot pass from the outer to the lower. But if it wants to transport from the outer to the lower, or from the lower concentration to the higher concentration, it needs some energy. Here the energy is the ATP. Don't confuse between the energy and the ATP. That means if it will ask that in the active transport the energy is needed or ATP is needed, always mention the energy is needed. Why? Because ATP is one of the type of the energy. That means we use ATP as a form of the energy. For example, some bacteria like halobacteria, they use light as a source of energy here, but still it is called as the active transport because of the investment of the because of the use of the energy, not the ATP. We use ATP as a source of energy. Halobacteria, they use light as a source of energy. So that means in the active transport, or the transport which moves against the concentration gradient, that means from the lower to higher concentration, the energy is needed. Either it may be in form of the ATP or it may be in the form of the light. Okay. So one of the most example is the sodium potassium pump. Sodium potassium pump. Okay. This is the sodium potassium pump. This is the sodium potassium pump. This is the extracellular fluid. That means it is the outer side. This is the cytoplasm. That means it is the inner side. So I have already told that always inside the sodium concentration is lower and the potassium is higher. On the outer side, the sodium concentration is higher and the potassium concentration is lower. So that means in the passive transport, potassium can easily pass from the inner to outer, and the sodium can easily pass from the outer to the inside. But if sodium wants to come from inner to outer, that means it is the against, or the potassium it wants from the outer to inner, it transports, this type of the transport is called as the active transport, and this type of the is called as the sodium potassium pump. Look at this structure. This is called as the, this type of the structure, it is called as the sodium potassium pump. and here 3 sodium, 1, 2, 3, 3 sodium molecules are transported from the inner to the outer, and like that 2 potassium molecule transports from the outer to the inner, and this is called as the active transport, and here the ATP is needed as a source of the energy. So, the sodium potassium pump, it is the example of the active transport through which 3 sodium and the 2 potassium are transported at the same time through this pump, and this pump is called as the sodium potassium pump. Okay. So, this is the all about the plasma membrane structure and the transport of the across the plasma membrane. Okay. If you like it, then please subscribe. Thank you.